Hello and welcome to this, our second lecture, our second online lecture for CERP2. And in this lecture, we'll be focusing a little bit or introducing the idea of theological reflection. As mentioned in the last online lecture, you've already been engaged with, in CERP1, critical reflection or reflective practice. And what we mean by critical reflection or reflective practice is simply thinking about what we're doing, reflecting on and about the things that we do. It means reflecting on our practice and on events or incidents with a specific view to informing and developing our future practice. So with a view to learning and becoming better practitioners. And I wonder, how reflective are you? Some people by temperament, by nature, tend to be more reflective than others. They tend to think about and chew over the things that they do in their lives. Whereas some people tend to go from one experience to the next without reflecting to any great length or any great depth. And so I wonder, how reflective do you think you already are, given that we all reflect to some degree or another anyway, and without doing a module in reflective practice? So in this module in CERP2, we will introduce the idea of theological reflection. And this simply brings theology itself into the very heart of the process of reflection. In many ways, theological reflection might seem quite similar to critical reflection, but the major distinction being that theology is brought into the conversation. And so I wonder also, how theologically reflective are you? When something happens in your life or something happens in the life of your church or community, how much do you or does your community reflect theologically on what has happened and respond accordingly? A couple of quotes about theological reflection. Firstly, from Thompson. Theological reflection is a process by which explicit connections are made between belief and practice. So it's a process, and it makes connections between our faith and how we live, the things that we do. From Pattison, theological reflection is a critical conversation which takes place between the Christian tradition, a student's own faith, and a particular situation. It's a conversation between Christian tradition, ourselves, and the situations or circumstances in which we find ourselves. What are some of the sources that we draw on for theological reflection? Perhaps the principal one or the most obvious one might be Scripture, the Bible, where we draw upon the teachings of the Old Testament and the New Testament and see how they relate to our lives and the world in which we live. We might also draw on the insights of our faith community, whether that's our local church congregation or the denomination we find ourselves in as Baptists or Anglicans, Roman Catholics or Orthodox. What does our faith community have to say about the events and situations that we face? Thirdly, our tradition. the Christian tradition of 2 centuries, and the Judeo-Christian tradition, the various doctrines or teachings of the church, its worship and liturgy, and the preaching that we encounter as we attend church, and theology in general, what theologians have had to say about various issues throughout the centuries. And finally, we can also bring to bear secular sources, the wisdom that has been acquired over the years about various things such as leadership, homelessness, medical ethics, and so on. Importantly, theological reflection seeks to be transformative. In other words, it looks to change how we live and act in the world as followers of Jesus, perhaps especially with regard to a specific situation or circumstance. How do we respond to poverty? How do we respond to homelessness? How do we respond in our local environments to the needs of the youth or the elderly or single parents? So it seeks to be deeply transformative and to change how we live. Some methods of theological reflection, as with CERP1, with critical reflection, you will have looked at certain methods of reflection, for example, Kolb. Likewise, in theological reflection, there are many methods of theological reflection which seek to aid us in our reflection. Some of these are pastoral cycles, which we'll look at in greater depth on our residential, movement to insight, narrative reflections, lectio divina, a way of devotionally praying with scripture, and imaginative approaches, such as those devised and advocated by Saint Ignatius. And these all simply seek to guide us or help us in the process of reflection, perhaps taking us through several simple stages, one leading to and from others. Thank you for watching this online lecture. There are a number of tasks set, and please complete those in time for the beginning of the next online lecture.